right. So welcome everybody to Rasayana.com. I'm here with Eva,
Eva,
here.
yeah.
Eva Lueng from terracura.org. She's a local designer and founder of this organization that really specializes in bringing people together in the fields of design and the fields of environmental education, specifically around permaculture and architecture. And so I invited her to join me this afternoon for a nice little tea time chat about some of her work in design thinking and how we really have to build some foundational skill sets in mindset and before we get to the actual building of any kind of design.
Yeah.
And so Eva, welcome. Thank you for
Thank you.
sharing your time with us today.
Absolutely.
You
It's
go ahead and lead. Introduce yourself to the group, those that may not be familiar with you.
here.
Tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So everybody, I'm Eva. I grew up in Southeast Asia, and long story short, I've been for the past 15 years. I've been practicing architecture in the United States and sustainability. Being a kid who grew up in concrete jungles, my being so architecture and designing of our environment has always been the most obvious instrument for me to create impact. But that kind of led me to really question, how this a building that feels like a very localized intervention, how can it impact something that's beyond the boundaries of the walls, just no different than a body. So I think about architecture as almost like our third skin, if you will. Beyond our skin, it's, our building envelope. How is it affecting the health of people? And so that's one layer of design that I'm conscious about. But then I realized that it never is enough to stop there either. How does that relate to our landscape, our immediate environment? So that led me to permaculture, because we have to work with the other systems that are external to us too. So that got me interested in permaculture design, things like phytoremediation, meaning using plants to actually clean contaminated environments. That led me to agriculture, learning about regenerative agriculture. And that started to bring it really home is that impacts the person directly, what we eat, how we take care of our land. And then it led me to education, because in order to learn how to do that, we have to educate ourselves. And what does it mean to care for the land? And what does it mean to grow community?
Right. What does it mean to care for ourselves and the
care for
planet
ourselves?
as a whole?
Right. And you cannot do it alone. So you need a team, a community, and a community of practitioners like yourself, Chris, and folks you work with. So it came full circle, and that working, and then that brought me into a very self-reflective place. So for the past at least 7 years, I've been, doing meditations, learning different healing modalities, from Vipassana meditation to anything, massages. That's really how I connected with Chris too. So self-care.
Right.
Self-care is huge. That also led me to right now education, but education not just for kids, but also for teams and clients that I work with. So it led me to everything, and it kind of start to steer me in the direction where education is not just, I can teach through design, but what am I designing? Not just the environment, but also teaching people to build their capabilities to do this work themselves. So this can range from me teaching elementary school kids how to grow food, to leading $20 million infrastructure projects in actually how do we regenerate the whole city and the health of whole cities. So it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's a pattern of thinking, and this is what I really hope to share. There's no regenerative building, but there are regenerative thinking that leads to true regeneration. So that's how I think about it.
Even,
So,
applying these concepts to inanimate objects like a building, right?
yes.
But how does that building impact this space around it and those that occupy the space within it? And all about the relationship between them. Tell me more. I'm fascinated. This layered
Right.
system of thinking.
Right. So if you think about the history, just a little blurb about, geeking out on sustainability in buildings. Some of us might have
Yeah,
heard.
you're in the right place to geek out about sustainability. Yeah. This
So,
tribe is all about sustainability.
right. So in the building level of working, some of us might have heard of the LEED building system,
Mm-hmm.
which is a green building rating system.
Right.
And so it focuses a lot on, a point-based system that architects work with to, how the HVAC system, heating ventilation systems working, and, all these very mechanical stuff, like the rating of the windows to trap heat and all that, the breathability of the building skin, how much daylighting we're getting, because that affects our stress level, our health, and and it comes directly back to people. And in the recent years, so the LEED system has been around for about 20 years.
Really that long? And
Right,
yet we still have these buildings that are
right.
old
So
and not
yeah,
modified.
so that's part of the inspiration that I realized working in the sustainability and really feeling the constraints of it, the limitations of it is, so what if we have, even if the entire world are full of green buildings now, does that mean our world is cured?
Mm.
I mean, that's something that I do think a lot. No, because how are we as people evolving? From a
That's so
consciousness level,
easy.
and it's not. There's no silver bullet. There's no one mechanical solutions.
Right.
So
It's a
while
shift of consciousness, really.
right, so while those are important, that even now, even this type of rating system is evolving. So in the last 5 years, we have something called, and do feel free to check it out, something called the WELL certification. And this is very interesting because
WELL, well.
yeah, well, it's another rating system that has developed over the past 5 years, so it's fairly new, but it complements the mechanical nature of dealing with these inanimate object system that we deal with LEED, but it also brings in human and organization culture to it.
Oh, wow.
So it's a complementary thing. So they're starting to look at, there are 7 concepts that WELL system kind of, you're rated on 7 different concepts from, air, water, but then the funny thing is it's also including the mind, nourishment, and stuff like that. So
Wow.
people are thinking more into company policy. Not only does the building need to work to support healthy living, healthy workplaces, especially with COVID-19.
Mhm.
We are fortunate that sometimes air quality, we take air quality for granted.
Mhm.
But for example, in places like China, some places actually having good air quality and ventilation is actually at a top priority. Landlords actually are able to rent their office space better because of that, because air quality are really poor in certain areas.
Exactly.
So it's interesting to see even this type of rating system are incorporating more the programmatic, the human factor in it. So that's one
Oh,
aspect of
that's
it.
beautiful. Yeah. Where did that originate, or who was the kind of creator or founder of that well system?
I
Or
believe a company, an organization called Delos founded it, and I think that's a real estate development firm.
Mhm.
And I think so that I don't know the history of it too much,
Yeah.
but that was one of the. I believe that was how it started.
That's fascinating. I'm thrilled to hear that it even exists and that it has been
Yes.
around for 5 years.
So,
I mean, given the population
mhm,
of clients I've seen over the years, the environment in which they're spending their work hours at has had
mhm.
huge impacts on their health and well-being that I see. And help my clients work through. I
Yeah.
remember one particular client whose work setup was in a windowless room with loud noise of
Mhm.
systems. Maybe it was HVAC or I don't know what, but it was
Right.
loud and fluorescent lights and no air circulation. And her immune system was really struggling. And this
Yeah.
was a healthy adult. This is not someone with a kind of existing history or
Right.
vulnerability. So it really warms my heart that this is starting
Mhm.
to become more in people's collective consciousness.
Right. And it's funny that you say that because I think you'll find the rating system concept interesting because it's based on actually this, I believe, the human systems that is related to that. So they're tackling the circulatory system, the skeletal system. So things like the standing desk versus non-standing desk, even things like the nervous systems. So the well system is actually all the criterias that mitigation strategies for contaminants and working with company policy. So actually, you actually have to work with the human resource of the company to even get certain rating, to get a certain level of rating. Not only that, you need to recertify every 3 years because that's one of the downfall of LEED is you can build a building and say it works, but depending on the capacity and the culture of the people managing it, you can't assume that people will keep that up.
Correct.
So the accountability is more on the performance years to go. So you can actually increase your rating down the road or
Mhm.
even get taken off the certification
Right.
if
It's
you're
a
not
dynamic
really
system.
accounted for it. Yeah.
Mhm.
So some of those geeky like rating systems that we are seeing in the built environmental world. Yeah. Yeah. So I was hoping, does it help,
Yeah,
Chris?
very
Yeah, learn
much. It gives a
about,
framework for our discussion.
yeah. So one thing, so back to, I was contemplating on the purpose of this call and maybe thinking about how this could, in the short period of time that we have, how to make this more reflective and maybe introducing what this framework, what does it mean to think regeneratively? So something that um, uh, folks can take home and think about it. So I'm gonna share my screen. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, actually, it looks like you disabled my screen sharing.
Oh, let's see if I can do that.
Yeah.
Why did I do that? Let's see.
It's definitely helpful in some circumstance.
Let me take a peek. I'm not even sure. Maybe some setting,
Mm-hmm.
in which case I may not be able to change now that we've
I
started.
think you can.
Oh, no,
So
here it is. Yep,
yeah,
I found
yeah.
it.
There you go. I see it now.
There.
Well, let me
Success.
see.
Great.
Um,
How long have you been in this work or working with Tara Kruger now? It's been 10 years?
Terra has been the past 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, I realized the important, because not many people were talking about it. And definitely the design world I come from comes from a very top down structure.
Mhm.
So, but then I realized the whole permaculture framework itself is a much more holistic design framework. So I
And
was actually,
grassroots. Yeah, and
yeah,
very
it
grassroots.
feels very grassroots and it has that tone. So I was like, coming from a very top down design environment, I was like, I kind of want to combine it. And so Terracura became a platform for me to do that.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah, I
yeah.
absolutely love
Okay.
it.
1 second.
Yeah,
Harry.
take your time.
I think I can do this. Um, can you see the
Yep,
slides?
I sure can.
Okay, I'm gonna just put it on presentation mode.
Sure thing.
So I think we touched upon this in our last conversation too is the purpose of this work in my work is whether I'm coaching my team, working with my clients to teaching kids. My purpose is to really escalate people's ableness to take on significant roles in transformation. And this transformation starts with themselves, really. And are we aware of how we are learning, thinking, and being before we even do anything? We have we are very habituated to just do something and get into problem solving mode. I know that because architects are trained to identify a problem and solve a problem. But to solve any problem effectively, I'm realizing that we really have to learn. You know, we talk about awareness, about mindfulness, but what are we aware and mindful of? So how are we effective, and how effective are we or can we be in learning how we are being thinking even before we do anything? So that become the real purpose and aim of my work. And we talk about, and we hear a lot in the change making space and mind setting space and paradigm shifting space, is people talk about building capacity and capabilities. And yes, that's definitely part of the work. But what does that mean? Capacity, you can have the capacity, given the right training, to be a great educator, for example, or a great massage therapist, for example. But capacity is completely useless if it is not utilized, right?
Right.
So people talk about, oh, we need to build companies' capacity. But how do you make sure, how can we make sure that this capacity is actually activated? More importantly, how do we become self-actualized in this? So the ability to call forth our capabilities on demand.
Yeah,
That's the key.
the yogis, we call this Svadhyaya
Oh,
in
awesome.
yoga. The Ashtanga yoga systems, Svadhyaya, Sva means self, Dhya means to study in
Awesome.
Sanskrit. And so that's why Svadhyaya is one of the first practices of the Ashtanga yoga system.
Thank you.
The yamas and niyamas of that. The yogi is supposed to study themselves for any action onto others or even action onto themselves, that to be able to first identify. And Ayurveda, the language of the yogis, the medical system of the yogis, is what provided the operating manual for how to do that, right?
Awesome.
How to know yourself through the 5 great elements and through your doshic unique constitution. And then that informs your capability, your capacity, and being able to understand what are your superpowers and what's your kryptonite. As I explained to my clients, you know, we have them. So that self-study is at the heart of any transformation.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's part of I think it's my personal journey too, is it's so easy to start from the external. I gotta design green buildings, but then you come full circle. You can't, there's a limit beyond which you can actually act well. It's correlated to the degree of your self-development.
Exactly. Your evolution. Exactly.
Yes.
This is something that I want to remind my audience of, in that, you know, when we're trying to evolve our daily habits, we have to understand that there are certain skill sets that we need to have developed before we can up level to the next stage. And what I've seen after working with my clients now professionally for over 15 years is that sometimes people are not recognizing their level of development, and they're trying to go from here to here, and they forget there's like 2 steps in between. And that's where the daily practices and
Yes.
repetition of new mindset and building an environment that supports that new mindset and the person you want to evolve into will occur. So I just want to mention that, because it
Fascinating.
is something that is overlooked as you talk about
Yes.
skill
Absolutely.
sets and these levels of
Right.
capacity and capability.
And it's very evident, and it's very hard, especially if you're working at a corporation with very set bureaucratic structures. People talk about best practices and all these checklists of stuff, but it's never the case. And that's a core aspect of being a regenerative thinker and practitioner, is that there's no end to it.
Right.
There's no fixed set of deliverables where you hit that last checklist point, you're done.
Right.
That's part of our evolution is never ending. There are what we call in our work, future states that you're aiming towards, but it regenerates. The cycle is just like life, is a cycle of birth, rebirth, death, rebirth. So,
right.
So that's
that in Western medicine, right? We see that our cells in the human body recycle, they turn over, right? There's autophagy, and the cells that shouldn't be repurposed or recycled, they get destroyed and digested.
Yes.
And that is what we're trying to do with the practices of yoga and Ayurveda. We're trying to find ways to digest our lives, right? Digest all of the consciousness that lives within every single cell. And that's where Agni, the power of the fire element and our digestive capacity, is so key.
Yeah, awesome. We've been talking about framework thinking, and that whether you see people talk about framework, you see a lot of company missions and visions. There's always sometimes these little charts, whether it's in a pie form or some sort of diagram. A lot of times, to me, is not useful because it's just another list. How framework thinking actually benefited me is it's a tool really for ordering and organizing your thinking, but it's a prompt. It's a very dynamic and alive thing to help us reflect and cultivate discernment and honesty in the way we reflect.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
It takes so much discernment, and that's part of our meditative practice. I mean, personally, I do that every day. It's easy to say, oh yeah, of course I'm doing regenerative work. And I do that with my team too, is, of course, what are you talking about? Of course I am. And then when they actually use the framework to check themselves, then they realize there's actually a misalignment in their aspiration versus where they're at. Yeah. So this is another way of thinking when I introduce this body is very, very deep work. It's a lifelong practice work. Is, we usually start with that dotted line to the right, what we do and how do we do it, right? Okay, we have a problem. I have a headache. I have a muscle ache. I go do a massage or, something. We do something, we solve problem. In the sustainability world, we also struggle with, so you have your LEED rating system and whatnot. You have your green building, renewable energy, solar panels and whatever.
You got your massage, yeah.
Right, you got your massage. Sustainability ultimately means, how do we sustain sustainability? How do we sustain what we do, right?
The results, how do you sustain results?
Right, so capability building in our sense is most people don't do this work, but we go left. We move upstream. So we have to learn so we know how we do what we do, we make certain decisions. But how do we think about what we do? That's paradigm shifting. And then even deeper is how do we think about how we think?
Yeah.
Right? There are people, believe it or not, I couldn't believe it. I didn't know that. There are still people who believe that the earth is flat. So if this is your absolute belief system, do you question why you think that way, right? And then the even more upstream level work, and this is true working at the being level, is how do we observe how we become? So it's very not intuitive, and it's a constant practice, moment to moment practice.
Well, it's not intuitive to Western culture or Western thinking. This is very intuitive to a lot of holistic Eastern systems and practices, that you're starting with self and that self-observation and self-study.
Yeah.
And then we're relying on the Buddhi in Samkhya philosophy, which is the origin of the system of Ayurveda and yoga. The
Mm,
Buddhi is a part of our consciousness that is responsible for discernment. It
right.
is what allows us to decide whether a choice is beneficial or not beneficial
Right.
to ourselves and to our health.
Right.
And then we have the sattva, rajas, and tamas, which are the universal states of
Mm,
consciousness in the mind, or the mahagunas, we say in Ayurveda, the great elements of the universe.
mm-hmm.
And this affects psychology in Ayurvedic medicine. So how we think and how we're aware of how we're thinking
Mm-hmm.
is that kind of tertiary layer there I see from the dotted line, right? And then we
Right.
get to hopefully, yoga, union of mind and body,
Hmm.
where we are able to
Yeah.
evolve.
Right. It's funny because I don't like I don't sometimes I use very secular terms, as you know,
Mhm.
and I kind of need to enter this type of conversation from that point because of the work that I do.
Of course.
But there are practitioner people who are more aware. They're like, "Wow, you're the most Buddhist person I've ever spoken with,"
Mm,
and I actually am not a Buddhist.
right.
Like, not define it that way anyway.
Right.
But I recognize where sometimes these feedback is coming from, and it's good to see that. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
um, so this is something that I want to introduce is the level of caring, and I suspect that this might be quite interesting also from a self-care purpose, from an Ayurvedic purpose,
Mhm.
is from what level are you being from? So how much do you care, and what type of caring are you engaged in for yourself and also for other people? So because why I would like to talk about this level, this is a framework. As you can see, it looks like a list, but it actually helps you question, reflect on, okay, so kind, what does, people talk about these terms, right? Very quite interchangeably sometimes. You gotta be
Mhm.
kind, be good to other people, you gotta be caring. Everybody talk about compassion now, right? In our world. Well, but what does that mean? They actually operate, they actually translate to very different actions, and it's a very different kind of energy. So kindness, you can think about, okay, you see a homeless person, you give them $1. Yay, I'm being kind. I'm grateful. That's kind of, it's a form of being thoughtful, it's a kind of kindness. It's a
Mhm.
form of kindness. So then next step up is more relational, empathy. It operates on what we call a very sensitive energy. So this is the what how this usually translates in the world is you see these huge protests that comes from a place of empathy, that you want to acknowledge the suffering of somebody, and you say, yeah, I see your pain and I hear you. Compassion is another layer up. So for me, compassion is I see your suffering, but I will take action to actually alleviate your suffering. So in some case, you can already see that the different kind of action that can translate if you're conscious of where you're operating from. So so that's why sometimes I personally feel you can't protest all you want. It's very important to have a voice for that people who are at a disadvantaged level. But if we stop there and we don't do anything beyond that, it doesn't actually create systems change, right? You can make a lot of noise.
Right. Right. Like
So but that doesn't mean that it's not a,
posting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these worldwide marches and protests, they serve a purpose, but we can't just stop there. Where do we go next? So compassion as the element of, okay, I will do something to
Of
alleviate
action. Yeah.
action. Then, okay, the fourth level, caring, I know for lack of a better word, it's almost anticlimactic. But for me, and because I do consciously try to act at that level, what that means to me is actually you are actually developing other people's capability to do exercise compassion for themselves and to care for the external world. That's very different
Yes.
than to, so it's like compassion could be, yes, I see your pain, I alleviate your pain, maybe I address certain needs. I give you money for a year. I know that will alleviate some of your stress, but or even coaching sometimes operate in that level a lot. So as a some form of coach and designer myself, educator, I have to be very careful, and I check myself. Am I really working in a compassion kind of short-term solution type of solutions? Or am I actually training people to build their own capability to do this work for themselves? To me, that's truly regenerative. So if we want to tie back to regeneration. So reflect on your daily actions. Are you donating your dollar to Red Cross? That's, that has a certain effect, but how effective is it? So there's no right or wrong, but be aware. So this is one way of thinking about it. So then we talked about the next level of, so first you have how are you being, is very internal, is invisible. Then with that translate to the being state will influence how you think. Some of my work, some of the foundational work that I do with folks, my clients is, we talk about different paradigms that you're working from. And this has a very real manifestation in our external world. So I think I'm going to repeat some of the talking points we did last time. So at the very basic level, we operate from a value return, which is business as usual. I give you a dollar, you give me a service.
Right.
Right. A very transactional way of working. And there are places for that to operate, but we can't apply this mentality that's so deeply ingrained in our culture to everything. Right. So in the design world, this works like this. Okay, I hire you as an architect. You give me a house. That's value return. Okay, I don't really care about, the environment. So there are architects who operate at that level. Yeah, I'm just going to give you a building, very utilitarian, your shed, whatever, right? And then there's the other level of consciousness that stepped in is arrest disorder level, is people are realizing that this purely transactional way of exchanging value is not enough, because sometimes it's done, and a lot of times it's done at the expense of other people, right. Our well-being.
Or others.
So, right. So in our culture, arrest disorder shows itself up in the judicial, the law, the policing culture is all based on reactionary. I screwed up, I'll punish you. Right. Or I try to mitigate, right? Even the lease system operate in this level, right? So it's good. It might have some effect. It's like a Band-Aid that doesn't even really work long-term. It will come off at some point. So, but that's at least get people to thinking about, oh, wait a minute, I'm not, I have to be more conscious about my actions. Then comes the do-gooder level where, okay, the permaculture, in my mind, works a lot in that level. So usually do-gooders are, they come from a certain set of ideals. Like permaculture is a framework of holistic design. Yet, you can't go there and impose these ideals on everybody. Even though, this is it, if we do this, the world will be cured. It might have some effect, but who are you to say what's best for a place, a person, a community? Because it is very unique. You can't go to a community that is, I have friends who work in conflict negotiation in war zones where it is extremely difficult when people are in survival mode.
Right.
You can't start talking about these aspirational things when, and imposing a certain set of ideals. Spiritual wars come from that.
Right.
This is my God. Right. And this is what will cure the world. It's very dangerous, actually. Yeah. So be mindful of that. And then the regenerative life level, again, it's about a step up. Like it comes back to what we've been talking about, is how do you create, yes, 1, 2, 3, we need to do all of those in the right time at the right place. Regenerating life paradigms come, working with how do we be co-evolutionary with the natural systems around them. And there's certain hierarchy to that, meaning, at least maybe I'm a little biased, but ecological health underlies everything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
Right.
mean, that is at the foundation of what now even Western medicine is becoming more committed to in terms of gut health. And
Mm-hmm.
what does a healthy microbiome look like? Well, it first starts in our soil and the
Mm-hmm.
microorganisms that our food and the roots and shoots and leaves
Right.
are pulling up. And in Ayurveda, we emphasize a seasonal diet so that you're
Absolutely.
ingesting the right microbes for that time of year. Nature has already intelligently designed the medicine for you. And so if we're not living in those rhythms,
Right.
and now circadian rhythm has become much more validated in terms
Yes.
of its
Yes.
health and healing, uh, you know, properties, value. Yeah, that is really where regeneration and rejuvenation and repair come from, people. This is where we repair and heal from injuries, both from the gross tissues in our body and more on our higher, more intuitive, emotional bodies as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. So that's the difference. So say for example, how would that play out in the design architecture world, right? So you could be in the do good level where, oh, I'm passionate about green buildings and I'm gonna put every single solar panels addressing renewable energy system, the most water efficient fixtures, and get lead platinum in your building. But then if you're conscious of the larger system that you were talking about, Chris, then maybe my goal, the kind of architecture that I'm designing, is actually to work with every single site with the aim to incorporate food production, which we're starting to see now.
Yes.
You will design parks differently, which is one of the example that maybe we can talk more if we have time.
Mhm.
The project with Terracura about growing food forests. So
Wow. Yes.
yes, so food forest, but then you realize that, okay, yes, can have all this infrastructure in place, yet in order for that to sustain, to keep regenerating life in that place, we have to build the capability of the people to run and manage that place.
Right.
So that's level 4.
Right. Right.
So it's just becoming more and more comprehensive and more complex. Um, but that's the
And
way.
so that you touched on something that just made me think of the communities that are into, now homesteading is becoming that much more an asset and skill set that people are
Yes.
looking at now. I know that a lot in my communities of yoga and Ayurveda, there are a lot of tiny houses, tiny homes are all the thing in terms of sustainability and impact on the planet. And I know I myself am, in my mind visualizing my mini homestead of how do I go about designing my home space to
Mm-hmm.
be synergistic with the land it's on
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and the ecosystem. Can I collect rainwater?
Mm-hmm.
How do I harness the elements?
Right.
Thrive.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So those are instruments that we can work with. So have you heard of the Maharishi University?
Sure.
So in Fairfield, Iowa, they have a Vastu system, living system. So my friend, he's a head architect for the U.S. Vastu architecture,
Oh, wow.
and and so if you look up, he's a Vedic architect. So
Yeah,
in
Vastu is, for those of you that don't know, Vastu
yeah.
is kind of this Ayurvedic astrology, if you will, and using kind of like an Indian feng shui, for lack of a better comparison.
Mhm.
Forgive the crude comparison there. I'm not an expert at either, but Vastu, we're talking about an intentional design for homes and space. Healing
Right.
spaces and panchakarma clinics often are designed according to Vastu.
Hmm. So it's a very ancient city planning and architecture system. So there are communities that are designed in that spirit. What I want to highlight is that there's a way to order and organize space that could potentially help our energy. But then what's interesting is that that community also, the way they live with one another, like I think every day at a certain time, like you see thousands of people going to a place where everybody meditates and they practice transcendental meditation together. So it goes, my point being, it goes way beyond the infrastructure of any kind, whether you're growing your own food or your tiny houses or your green infrastructure. This always comes back to the people element and how they take care of themselves and how they care for other people. Yeah.
And how they learn, how they evolve to be able to maintain what's been created.
Exactly. So that's the, how do you sustain sustainability? That's that. And then another framework that I work with is, so from what are you doing from? And this is more of the action feels like levels. So understand that sometimes it's good. So for me, I was like, okay, I can go into a community that's highly, in deep, say, war, trauma. I can't just go in and say, let's go straight to regeneration.
Right.
You have to understand there's, where you're operating from, but understand the limitations of each. So if you're stabilizing, people might not even have a roof over their head. And then if you do get to that point, you have to operate, say, a building. What are all these functions? And then you have to maintain some of these systems. Maybe you have to do, there's certain educational program or management program that have to be set in place. And then maybe you get to go to the improving the environmental systems level. Most of the time, one of the ways we start some of our coaching conversation with design is like, where do you think you are operating at right now? And almost everybody is saying, yeah, in the general aspect or climate of things, in the, say, the architecture industry, most people are barely hanging in the maintain, let alone improve. So we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
We really do. So we can.
And it applies beyond a building, and you're talking about a city or a country. It can take generations to go through these stages, right?
But there are ways to galvanize people, is to get them to think from the regenerative level. And it's beyond the scope of this conversation. It's really deep work, but helping people to see beyond the problems. Like in our work, we always say, we don't start with problems. We start with the potential. Is when we work from potential, the problems will dissolve, literally dissolve, if you do it right. But if you start from the problem, it's very easier for us to do that because sometimes it's very urgent, right? If you have, when some place blow up, in war zone, you don't go in.
House is on fire. Emergency is here. Yeah.
Right. So, but we do, as what we call regenerative practitioner standpoint, you have to help people create the space to think from a potential standpoint. And, we can go on to talk about what potential really means. Is not opportunities, actually. It actually has to be rooted in the essence of a place in a specific time. So what applies to you, Chris, doesn't apply to me, Eva.
Right.
So for example, what I meant by that is people usually tend to think of opportunities and potential as similar. So that's why when I do, say, public design charrettes for public projects, what you see in the process is architects coming in as part of their lead checkpoint, host community engagement sessions, which is usually not effective because you can't just switch people's mindset and learn about a community over, say, 2 sessions or 3 sessions. Right. That's one of the limitations of this kind of checklist work, is you pat your shoulders and then you're like, I did a good job and I did it, I'm good,
This kind of reminds me of a book that I recently read called Humble Leadership by Shine and Shine. And they talk about, basically managing groups of people and how the top-down approach and that transactional
Yeah,
relationship
it's
is
very,
outdated and limited.
it is.
And now we're going really more to this integrative approach to relationships,
Yes,
working in teams and working in community where people are more personally invested. You got to be invested for the long haul because
right.
that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the long haul. There's no point in hanging around till you're 80, 90, 100 years old if your body is breaking down, if
Yeah.
your mind is breaking down. So,
Mm-hmm.
so many of these principles resonate with Ayurveda and the
Yeah.
system of self-healing because that's what it is. It's about understanding what are the constituents to the system that's going to work for this particular individual.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the
Mm-hmm.
most customizable medicine there is, yet based on the most general, universal principles of nature. So,
Absolutely. And we, in this work, we say, I mean, one of our taglines is really, we heal the planet place by place and people by people. Because, and, and, and one thing that is crucial, like to help people see the potential, and that's what actually will eventually galvanize. I mean, think about it. If we want to actually heal a city that is degenerating, how do you inspire, motivate people to act? Our first step is actually to activate their will. So for example, there's a project that's been done and where it's in Chile actually. One of my colleagues worked on. It's a huge real estate development project, and usually developers have a bad reputation. You're coming in and you gentrify or
right,
you displace people, and so what happened, the architects can't even do their job because they can't even move the project forward because you have about 24 different groups of activists fighting with
right.
the developer. Everybody acts out of a fear-based mentality, right? There's no trust. So we came in and in the 2-week process, we turned the climate around. Basically, they brought us in as basically saying, okay, we don't believe what you do, but we are out of options. So I'm going to give you like a couple months, see what you can get. Because if you can turn this around, it's going to save us a decade of lawyer fees. So this work that we're doing, it has real, is not just impactful, but it actually not just de-escalate, but without working in value return, to get people working away from value return, we actually lower the constraints amongst people
Mm,
that they may not be seeing. So what in this case, this real estate project was, all that is that, okay, you care about the activism, okay, you care about a human justice, social justice, somebody care about the water quality, the developer care about the money. No, there's nothing wrong with that. So basically, to the developers, we say, we have no problem with you making money, but you can't just come in and do anything you want. And to help them understand that the success of your project is not just about the success of your project. It's your success of the success of the project depends on the success and the health of the whole city. And they're
yes.
like, I get it. Okay, I'll work with you on that. So their project becomes the health of the city.
I love it. I love it.
It immediately switched the dynamic of this transactional approach. And then to the activists who say, yeah, to work. So you care about the city, right? I mean, at the end of the day, all we're saying is that a healthy home and a healthy environment is a unifying factor for everyone. All we need to do is help people see that they are inherently collaborators. And
Yes.
in 2 weeks, people start to work together. And yeah, but that's the start of people helping people see the potential and to galvanize them and build the will around that potential. But that's the difference. Rather than coming in and try to force people out of their homes and just try to pay their way
Build
out.
another condo building or whatever it is.
Right. And so actually you are removing constraints, and you see how that approach eventually will solve all like the water issues, all these little problems that people usually targeted
Mm-hmm.
in isolation
Right.
dissolve, because we're all looking at working together to
It's a collective approach.
it's a collective.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy work, but it's also not rocket science.
Much like self-healing, folks, it's not easy work, but it's not rocket science either. You know, we know, thankfully, divine design, you know, we know what is best for us if we're able to be still enough and quiet enough to listen. And,
Right.
and
You have to actually take the effort to slow down.
Yeah, it's a skill. We're just catapulted, you know? So, yeah, we got about another 15 minutes or so. I want to respect your time, so I'm going to let you continue on with your talk.
Sure. I just have like this, I think the last slide I have.
Okay.
I just want to flash, we're not going to go through everything, but the key thing is talking about how this way of regenerative thinking actually correlates to this. Everybody wants to talk about systems thinking, systems work now. And all these levels, all these frameworks that we just touched upon, there are a lot of them. They don't work in isolation. So in our line of work, we usually, at every single time, we work with at least 3 frameworks.
Oh, wow.
So think about, so this is, I'm not going to go through it, but and each of them correlate to what you're addressing in the iceberg diagram that you might have come across in terms of people talk about systems, creating systems change. Usually we can only see the 10% above the water, right? So it's no different. So we have to be very conscious about all these different frameworks and how to use them to check ourselves and be reflective. And this is a way of helping us hold more and more higher level of complexity, which is something that we're not trained in school a lot of the times. We are very specialized beings, which has its value if you're gonna fix somebody's heart, right? But there's also value in, I think there's a lot of room for us to learn to look at things we never, in the ancient cultures, indigenous culture, we start from the whole, the universe. We don't break it down into, you know, even you look at our DNA, right? Like I can know Chris, you, from looking at your DNA and your liver and your heart. We might look like we have the same thing, but we're not. Our essence is different. So that is part of the work, is cultivating part of the capabilities to help people hold more and more levels of complexities, and to, you know, reflect on the way they think and be, and then it will start to shift the way they actually externalize and manifest things from a health standpoint and whatever creative endeavor you're doing. So I just want to point that out. That
Om Namah
actually a
Shivaya.
slide.
Yes, and Om Namaha, and so it shall be. Namaha, and so it shall be. Because that is a great point to kind of end on and finish on. You know, we're talking about an integrative approach to how we think, live, and love, and lead, ultimately. And that's what will enable you,
right,
you know, have your express your light, your brilliance, leave your gifts and talents with the world. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to know more,
flash.
Oh.
Frameworks.
I think you slowed down with the internet connection there. Try again.
I think we're back. Yeah. But anyway, I think that's a lot that we covered today.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm so thrilled. I just love talking about these concepts, and yeah, would love to talk more with you. Definitely. I feel like